I should have known something was wrong when I saw my brother standing in the water at 3 a.m., fully dressed, not moving. But grief does strange things to your mind, makes you see what you need to see instead of what's actually there. And I needed to see Tommy alive so badly that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to turn the boat around and get the hell away from Harrow Lake. Let me back up. You need to understand who Tommy was before I tell you what happened to him. What's still happening to him. If what I saw last night was real, Tommy Carver was my older brother by 3 years, which meant he'd been looking out for me since I was old enough to walk. When our dad left, Tommy stepped up. When Mom started drinking, Tommy made sure I had dinner. When I got in trouble at school, got arrested for vandalism at 16, got my girlfriend pregnant at 17, and then lost the baby and the girlfriend in the same terrible month, Tommy was there, never judging, just present. Fishing was our thing. The one activity where we didn't have to talk about the mess our lives had become, where we could just exist in the early morning silence with our lines in the water, waiting for something to bite. Harrow Lake was our spot, a deep glacial lake in northern Minnesota that most tourists missed on their way to better-known waters. We liked it that way. Fewer people meant more fish and more quiet. Tommy drowned there 6 weeks ago. That's what the sheriff said anyway. Accidental drowning during a solo night fishing trip. They found his boat drifting near the eastern shore. Tackle box open, rod still in the holder. No life vest. No signs of struggle, no body, but the lake was deep, over 300 feet in some spots, and cold enough that bodies didn't always surface. I didn't believe it. Tommy was careful, almost obsessive about water safety. He'd never fish alone at night without his vest. He'd never leave his boat untethered, and he definitely wouldn't have just fallen overboard without a fight. But I had no proof, no alternative explanation, just the sick certainty in my gut that something else had happened. Something the sheriff couldn't explain and didn't want to investigate. So I came back to Harrow Lake, took a leave of absence from my construction job, packed up my own fishing gear, and rented a cabin on the southern shore. Told my wife Rachel I needed closure, needed to understand what had happened to my brother. She looked at me with that mixture of concern and exhaustion I'd been seeing a lot lately and said, "Just come home safe, please." I promised I would. It was a promise I'm not sure I can keep anymore. The cabin was small, drafty, exactly what I could afford. I spent the first few days retracing Tommy's movements, talking to the handful of locals who might have seen him that night. An old man named Vernon who ran the bait shop remembered Tommy coming in around 9 p.m., buying minnows and night crawlers. Said Tommy seemed fine, excited even. Mentioned he'd found a good spot for walleye on the eastern drop-off. He say anything else? I asked, trying not to sound desperate. Vernon scratched his gray beard, thinking. Said something about hearing fish jumping in a spot he'd never noticed before, out past the eastern marker, deeper water than he usually fished. He paused. Told him to be careful out there. That side of the lake gets strange at night, but you know how fishermen are. Tell them there's fish and they'll go anywhere. I thanked him and bought my own supplies, my hands moving through the familiar routine of selecting hooks and weights. It felt wrong doing this without Tommy. Everything felt wrong without Tommy. That first night on the water, I anchored near where they'd found his boat. The eastern drop-off was dramatic. The bottom fell away from 40 feet to over 200 in the span of maybe 30 yards. My fish finder showed it clearly, that sharp descending line where the lake bed just disappeared into darkness. I fished until dawn and caught nothing. But as the sun started to rise, painting the water orange and gold, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Someone calling for help. Faint, distant, coming from deeper water. A man's voice, urgent but not quite panicked. "Help! My boat! I can't! Help!" I grabbed my spotlight even though the sun was rising, scanned the water, saw nothing. Just empty lake and morning mist starting to burn off. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Keep making noise!" But the voice had stopped. Just water lapping against my hull, a loon calling from somewhere across the lake. Normal morning sounds. I told myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep and grief playing tricks, I motored back to the cabin, made coffee I didn't drink, and tried to sleep but couldn't stop hearing that voice. The next night, I went back, same spot, same anchor position. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, closer this time. "Help! Please! I'm drowning!" I killed my running lights. Heart hammering, grabbed my spotlight and swept it across the water toward the sound. And I saw him. A man in the water, maybe 50 yards out. Arms raised, head barely above the surface, he went under. Came back up gasping. Every instinct screamed at me to motor over there, throw him a line, pull him to safety. But something made me hesitate. Some quality to the movement that seemed practiced, rehearsed. Like someone who'd learned to mimic drowning without understanding the visceral terror of it. I raised the spotlight, trying to see his face. That's when I recognized the jacket. Red and black flannel. The same jacket I'd bought Tommy 3 Christmases ago. The same jacket they'd found in his boat, neatly folded. After he'd disappeared, my hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the spotlight. "Tommy?" The figure stopped thrashing, went completely still in the water. Head turned toward me at an angle that seemed wrong. Then it started again. The same desperate flailing, the same choked gasps, but I'd seen enough. I started my engine and backed away, slowly at first, then faster. The figure kept performing its drowning pantomime, but it wasn't following me, just stayed in that spot, treading water, waiting for someone who'd fall for the act. I made it back to the cabin as the sun was coming up, hands still trembling. Sat on the dock with my phone in my hand, trying to decide who to call. The sheriff. He'd think I was crazy. Rachel. She'd demand I come home immediately, and maybe she'd be right instead. I called the one person who might believe me. Dr. Sarah Chen, a folklorist and historian I'd found through desperate late-night internet searches. She'd written articles about lake monsters, water spirits, drowning legends. I'd thought her work was interesting but theoretical. Now I needed her expertise to be very, very real. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Dr. Chen? My name is Mark Carver. I think something in Harrow Lake killed my brother, and now it's pretending to be him." There was a long pause. Then, "Tell me everything." I did. Every detail from the past 6 weeks, from Tommy's drowning to the figure in the water wearing his jacket. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dr. Chen? I'm here. I'm thinking." She exhaled slowly. "Mr. Carver, has anyone else drowned in Harrow Lake before your brother?" "I don't know. I never thought to check." "You need to find out. Go to the local library. Check historical records, newspaper archives. I need to know how many drownings, when they occurred, and where on the lake they happened." Her voice was urgent now, professional. "And Mr. Carver, don't go back out on the water alone, not until I get there. You're coming here? I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon. What you're describing matches patterns I've researched, but never confirmed. If I'm right about what's in that lake," she trailed off, "just stay off the water, please." She gave me her number and told me to text her the address of my cabin. After we hung up, I sat there watching the sunrise over Harrow Lake, watching the water turn from black to blue to gold, and I thought about Tommy out there somewhere in the deep water, whether he was dead or something worse than dead. I thought about that figure in his jacket, mimicking drowning with mechanical precision, and I wondered what else it had learned to mimic. The Harrow Lake Historical Society occupied a small building on Main Street, run by a woman named Margaret Hoffman, who looked like she'd been cataloging local history since the town was founded. She peered at me over reading glasses when I explained what I needed. "Drownings? Goodness, that's morbid research. It's for my brother. He drowned here 6 weeks ago. I'm trying to understand how common these accidents are, if there are dangerous spots people should avoid." Her expression softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Yes, let me pull the records." She disappeared into the back room and returned with 3 boxes of newspaper clippings, old journals, and typed reports. This goes back to 1923 when the town started keeping formal records. Before that, it's spotty, just whatever the local paper reported. I spread out at a table and started reading. It didn't take long to see the pattern. 1923. Harold Jenkins, fisherman, drowned in eastern section. Body never recovered. 1931. Elizabeth Moore, age 16, drowned while swimming eastern shore. Body found 3 days later. 1947. 2 men, military veterans on fishing trip, both drowned. Eastern section. 1 body recovered, 1 never found. 1956. James Whitehorse, age 34, drowned at night. Eastern section. Body never recovered. 1973. Karen Delaney, age 22, drowned while camping eastern shore. Body recovered 1 week later. 1989. Michael Santos, age 45, solo fishing trip. Eastern section. Body never recovered. 2003. Amanda Chen, age 38, kayaking accident eastern shore. Body never recovered. 2011. Robert Hayward, age 51, fishing tournament. Eastern section. Body never recovered. 2019. Christina Vega, age 29, night swimming eastern shore. Body recovered 3 days later. 2024. Tommy Carver, age 35, night fishing, eastern section. Body never recovered. Every single drowning for the past 100 years had occurred on the eastern side of the lake. Most in the exact area where they'd found Tommy's boat, and more than half the bodies were never found. I photographed every page and texted the images to Dr. Chen. Her response came within minutes. This is what I was afraid of. The pattern is consistent with what I've researched. I'm leaving now, should be there by 8 p.m., stay away from the water. But I couldn't stay away, because as I packed up the archives, Margaret said something that made my stomach drop. You know, it's the strangest thing. About a week after your brother's accident, I saw him. I froze. What? Well, someone who looked just like him, I'd seen his photo in the news. So when I spotted him walking along the Eastern Shore Trail, I thought maybe the reports were wrong. Maybe he'd survived somehow. She shook her head. But when I got closer to say hello, he just walked into the lake, fully clothed, middle of the afternoon. Just walked in until the water was over his head and disappeared. Did you call anyone? I called the sheriff, but by the time deputies got there, the man was gone. They searched the shore, dragged the shallows, found nothing. She looked at me with worried eyes. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Grief can do funny things to perception, can't it? Yeah, I said quietly. It really can. But I knew she hadn't imagined it. She'd seen what I'd seen. Something wearing Tommy's face, mimicking human behavior without quite understanding it. Learning. I needed to talk to the families of the other victims, see if they'd experienced anything similar, see if they'd seen their loved ones after the drownings. It took the rest of the afternoon to track down contact information for 4 of the families, the ones who still lived in the area or whose relatives I could find through social media. I started with the most recent before Tommy. Christina Vega, the young woman who drowned in 2019. Her mother answered the phone, voice wary when I explained who I was and why I was calling. But when I asked if she'd ever seen her daughter after the drowning, she went very quiet. How did you know about that? My pulse quickened. You saw her? 3 times. The first was 2 days after she drowned, before they'd found the body. I was walking the shoreline, calling her name even though I knew it was useless. And I saw her standing in the water, waist deep, just staring at me. Her voice shook. I ran in after her, splashing through the water, calling out. But when I got close, she turned away and dove under. Never came back up. Did she say anything? No, she just smiled. But it was wrong, Mr. Carver. The smile was too wide, like she'd forgotten how smiling was supposed to work. A pause. The other times I saw her, she was always in the water, always smiling that horrible smile. I stopped going to the lake after that. Couldn't bear it. I thanked her and moved to the next call. Robert Hayward's widow told a similar story, seeing her husband standing on the dock 3 weeks after his drowning, gesturing for her to come closer. When she'd approached, he'd backed away and fallen off the dock, disappearing into the water. Michael Santos's brother had seen Michael calling for help from a boat, But when he'd motored over to investigate, the boat was empty. Every family had seen their loved one after death. Every appearance followed the same pattern. The victim luring people toward the water, then disappearing beneath the surface. By the time Dr. Chen arrived at my cabin, I had a folder full of accounts that painted a picture of something systematic, something that had been hunting on Harrow Lake for at least a century. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a waterproof case of equipment and a laptop bag that looked like it had seen serious fieldwork. "Show me everything," she said after the briefest introduction. I spread out my research on the cabin's small table, the drowning timeline, the witness accounts, the pattern of Eastern Shore deaths. She studied it all with focused intensity, occasionally making notes or pulling up reference materials on her laptop. Finally, she sat back. "It's a collector." "A what?" "There are legends across dozens of cultures about water spirits that collect the drowned. Kelpies in Scotland, the Nixie in Scandinavia, the Ahuizotl in Aztec mythology. But those are usually portrayed as malevolent spirits or animals. This is different." She pulled up a file on her laptop, showing me an academic paper she'd written. 3 years ago, I started documenting cases of what I call mimetic drowning entities, creatures or phenomena that don't just kill. They learn from their victims, study them, and then use that knowledge to hunt more effectively by pretending to be them. Exactly. The theory is that these entities preserve their victims somehow, keep them in a state between life and death, and by maintaining that connection, they can access the victim's appearance, voice, memories. Everything needed to lure in someone who knew the victim. I thought about Tommy in the water, wearing his jacket, mimicking drowning. Why? What's the purpose? I don't know. Maybe it's how they feed. On fear, on the life force of victims, on something we can't measure. Maybe it's just how they hunt. An evolutionary adaptation that lets them catch prey more efficiently. She closed the laptop. But here's what we know. These entities are tied to deep water. They can't survive in shallows, can't come fully onto land, and they need the collected victims to maintain their mimicry. If you sever the connection between the entity and its collection, it loses the ability to imitate. How do you sever that connection? She met my eyes. The only documented case I found was in Scotland, 1847. A Kelpie was terrorizing a village until a priest performed an exorcism ritual over the deep pool where it lived. The ritual required diving down to the bottom, to where the bodies were kept, and disrupting the preservation site. Diving to the bottom of Harrow Lake, the eastern section drops to over 300 feet. I know, that's why we need to find another way. She stood up, walked to the window overlooking the lake. Or we need to find someone willing to try. I looked out at the water, thinking about Tommy down there somewhere in the darkness, thinking about 9 other victims trapped in whatever state the entity maintained them. A collection spanning a century. "I'll do it," I heard myself say. Dr. Chen turned. "Mark, it's a 300-foot dive. You'd need specialized equipment, training, support team. And even with all that, the survival rate for deep technical dives, my brother is down there, or something wearing his face is using him to kill people. Either way, I can't just walk away. You have a wife. You told me that on the phone." I know. And I did know Rachel deserved better than a husband who'd throw his life away on a probably suicidal dive into a haunted lake. But she also deserved to live in a world where things like this didn't exist, where lakes were just lakes, not feeding grounds for something ancient and hungry. "Let me do more research first," Dr. Chen said. "There might be another way, something that doesn't require you dying in the attempt." We spent the next 3 hours going through her files, looking for any case study or legend that offered an alternative solution. But everything came back to the same requirement. Someone had to reach the collection site, disrupt whatever mechanism preserved the bodies, break the entity's connection to its victims. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Text from Rachel. "How are you doing? I miss you. Come home soon." I stared at the message. Guilt mixing with determination, I texted back. "Miss you too." Should be home in a few days. Love you. It wasn't quite a lie. I'd be home in a few days, one way or another. Either having done what I came here to do or not coming home at all. Dr. Chen was watching me. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Do you know any other way to stop it? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Then help me plan the dive. Tell me what I need to look for down there, what I need to do to break the connection. She sighed but opened her laptop again. Based on the Scottish account and similar legends, the preservation site will be obvious. The bodies don't decay normally. They're maintained in some kind of suspended state. You'll need to disrupt that state. Scatter the collection. Fire would work best, but underwater. She trailed off, thinking. Explosives may be something to physically destroy the site. I can get explosives. I work construction, know people who handle demolition. It would have to be a precise placement, too much, and you risk collapsing the lake bed, causing environmental damage. Too little, and the entity might just rebuild. She pulled up geological surveys of Harrow Lake on her screen. The eastern section has several deep channels and one main depression. That's probably where the collection is kept. Deepest, coldest, most isolated. We spent the rest of the night planning. By dawn, we had an outline of what I'd need. Technical diving gear rated for 300 feet, high-intensity lights, underwater demolition charges, and enough training to not kill myself on the descent. The training was the biggest problem. Technical diving took months to learn properly. I had maybe a week before my leave from work ended, before Rachel started asking serious questions about when I was coming home. There's a guy in Duluth who does extreme dive training, Dr. Chen said. Former Navy, specializes in rapid certification for people who need to dive deep fast. Not exactly safe or legal, but it's your best option. I called him as soon as the sun was up. His name was James Kettler, and when I explained what I needed, he was quiet for a long moment. 300 feet. That's technical mixed gas diving. Takes most people 6 months minimum to cert for that depth. How long for someone who learns fast? Doesn't matter how fast you learn, your body needs time to adapt. But, another pause. I can teach you the skills in a week, get you comfortable with the equipment, the procedures, the emergency protocols, whether your body can handle it, whether you'll get nitrogen narcosis or oxygen toxicity that I can't predict. You'd be diving on pure luck and adrenaline. What's your rate? He laughed, sharp and humorless. For what you're asking? 5,000 cash. And you sign a waiver saying if you die, it's not my fault. Deal. When can we start? Tomorrow. Bring everything I'm about to list. I spent that day gathering equipment, maxing out credit cards I couldn't afford, buying gear from dive shops in Duluth and Minneapolis. Dr. Chen helped me source the explosives through her academic connections. Research-grade demolition charges meant for underwater archaeology. Not exactly legal for what we were planning, but she didn't ask and I didn't explain. By the time I drove to Duluth the next morning, I'd spent over $15,000 I didn't have and committed to a plan that would probably kill me. James's dive shop was a converted warehouse on the industrial waterfront. He was exactly what I'd expected. Late 50s, gray buzz cut, the kind of weathered face that had seen too much and decided to stop being surprised by anything. He looked at me once and said, "You're not walking away from this, are you?" "No." "Then let's make sure you at least know what you're doing before you die." The next 5 days were the hardest physical and mental challenge I'd ever experienced. James ran me through dive after dive in Lake Superior, going progressively deeper, teaching me to read my gauges, manage my gas mixtures, handle equipment failures. He taught me about nitrogen narcosis, the martini effect, where every 50 feet feels like another shot of vodka clouding your judgment. He taught me about oxygen toxicity, about decompression stops, about all the ways a deep dive can kill you even when everything goes right. At 300 feet, you'll have maybe 20 minutes of bottom time before you have to start ascending, he said during a surface interval. And your ascent will take over an hour with multiple decompression stops. Miss those stops and you'll get the bends. Die in agony as nitrogen bubbles form in your bloodstream. Got it. Don't miss the stops. He studied me. You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't figured out which. Can't it be both? That almost got a smile. What's down there that's worth this risk? My brother, or what's left of him? James nodded slowly. Yeah, I had a brother too. Lost him in Afghanistan. I'd have done something this crazy if I thought it would bring him back. I'm not trying to bring him back, just trying to let him rest. Then do it right. Respect the water, respect your limits, and maybe you'll come back up. He handed me a dive computer. This is yours. It'll track your depth, your time, your gas supply. Trust it more than you trust your own judgment, because at depth, your judgment will be compromised. On the 5th day, James took me down to 280 feet. It was the deepest I'd ever been, deep enough that the world turned into a blue-black void, deep enough that my thoughts started to feel fuzzy and disconnected. But I followed my training, managed my breathing, completed the task he'd given me, and made a clean ascent with proper decompression stops. When we surfaced, he said, "You're as ready as you're going to be," which isn't very, but it'll have to do. I drove back to Harrow Lake that night with enough technical dive gear to fill my truck bed, and enough fear to make my hands shake on the steering wheel. Dr. Chen had been monitoring the lake while I was gone, watching for signs of the entity. She'd seen it twice, once as Tommy, once as Christina Vega, both times mimicking distress to lure potential victims closer. "It's getting more active," she said when I arrived. "Like it knows something's coming." Can it know that? Can it sense intention? I don't know what it can sense, but every legend I've studied says these entities are territorial, defensive. If it perceives a threat to its collection, it will protect it. Then I'll have to move fast. Get down there. Place the charges. Get out before it realizes what I'm doing. We spent the evening going over the plan one more time. I'd dive at dawn. When the water was calmest, Dr. Chen would be in a support boat on the surface, monitoring my dive computer through a wireless link. She'd have rope and markers to guide me back if visibility got bad, and she'd have a sat phone to call emergency services if everything went wrong. "When do you tell Rachel?" she asked quietly. "After. If I make it back, I'll tell her everything. If I don't." I didn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen's expression was pained. "She deserves to know what you're doing, to say goodbye just in case. If I tell her, she'll try to stop me, and she'd be right to try. This is insane and reckless and probably suicidal." I met her eyes. "But it's also necessary. That thing killed my brother. It's killed 9 other people that we know of. If I don't stop it, it'll keep killing." She didn't argue, just nodded and went back to checking equipment. I called Rachel that night, sitting on the dock in the darkness. She answered immediately, relief clear in her voice. "Mark, I've been so worried you haven't been answering your phone." "I know. I'm sorry. It's been complicated. When are you coming home?" "Soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after." I swallowed hard. "Rachel, I need you to know something. Whatever happens, I love you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm sorry I haven't always shown that." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're scaring me. What's going on?" "I'm just processing. Dealing with losing Tommy. It's made me think about mortality, about what's important. Mark, please tell me what's really happening." I wanted to. God, I wanted to tell her everything. But instead I said, "I'll explain when I get home, I promise. Just know that I love you, okay? I love you too. Please be safe." We said goodbye and I sat there in the dark, listening to the lake lap against the pilings, thinking about Tommy down there in the cold and the darkness, thinking about all the others trapped in whatever nightmare existence the entity maintained. Tomorrow I'd either free them or join them. Either way, this ended. The water was glass calm when I suited up at dawn. Dr. Chen helped me with the equipment, the twin tanks, the redundant regulators, the dive computer strapped to my wrist, the high-intensity lights. The demolition charges were secured in a waterproof pack, set to detonate on a 30-minute timer once I activated them. "Remember," she said, checking my gear one last time, You have 20 minutes of bottom time maximum. Place the charges, activate them, and start your ascent. Don't deviate from the plan. What if I see Tommy down there? She paused. It won't be Tommy. It'll be something wearing his face. Don't let it lure you deeper. Don't let it separate you from your equipment. Focus on the mission. I nodded, mouth too dry to speak. The weight of the gear was immense. Over 80 pounds of equipment hanging from my body. But once I was in the water, it would feel different, weightless. Free. You're a good man, Mark Carver. Your brother would be proud of what you're doing. He'd say I was being an idiot. She smiled. Yeah, he'd probably be right. But sometimes being an idiot is the same as being brave. I sat on the gunnel, looking down into the dark water. Somewhere 300 feet below, the entity was waiting. Its collection preserved in cold and pressure, and whatever dark chemistry kept them suspended between life and death. I put my regulator in my mouth, gave Dr. Chen a thumbs up, and rolled backward into Harrow Lake. The cold hit immediately. Even through my dry suit, I hung at the surface for a moment, letting my breathing settle, letting my mind accept what I was about to do. Then I deflated my BCD and began to sink 15 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet. The light from above fading, the water turning from green to blue to deep indigo. My ears popped and I equalized the pressure, kept descending, and at 100 feet, I started to feel the first effects of nitrogen narcosis. Slight euphoria, thoughts getting fuzzy around the edges. I checked my dive computer. Depth, time, gas supply, all in the green. I kept going. 150 feet. The blue had turned to black now, my lights cutting weak cones through the darkness. My breath sounded loud in my ears, rhythmic, mechanical. I was alone in a void, falling towards something I couldn't see. 200 feet. The narcosis was stronger now, making everything feel dreamlike. I could see why they called it rapture of the deep. There was something seductive about the darkness, about the silence, about the way normal concerns seemed to fall away. But I forced myself to focus, check the computer, control my breathing, keep descending. 250 feet. That's when I saw the first body. She was suspended in the water column, arms outstretched, eyes open, not floating, not sinking, just held there as if the water itself was supporting her. Christina Vega. I recognized her from the photos her mother had shown me. She looked perfect, preserved, like she'd drowned yesterday instead of 5 years ago. Then she blinked. I nearly dropped my regulator. Her eyes tracked to me, focused, aware. Her mouth opened and I heard her voice through the water, through the impossible physics that should have made speech impossible at this depth. Help me. It wasn't a recording, wasn't a memory. She was somehow conscious, somehow aware, trapped in this suspended state for 5 years. I wanted to go to her, wanted to free her, but I forced myself to keep descending. The entity was using her, just like it used all of them. Getting distracted would get me killed. 270 feet. More bodies now. I recognized some from the photos I'd seen. Robert Hayward, Michael Santos. Others I didn't know, all perfectly preserved. All with open eyes that tracked my movement. Some reached toward me. Others just hung there, mouths opening and closing in silent pleas. 290 feet. And then I saw the collection site. It wasn't a cave or a depression like I'd expected. It was a structure, something built from stone and bone and materials I couldn't identify, rising from the lake bed like a cathedral dedicated to drowning. The bodies were arranged around it in concentric circles, held in place by what looked like pale roots or tentacles extending from the central structure. And at the center, newest and most prominently displayed, was Tommy. My brother hung there with his eyes open, his red and black flannel jacket moving slightly in the current. When he saw me, his face split into that too wide smile I'd seen on the figure in the water. Mark. His voice came through the water, clear as day. You came to visit. I'm so glad. I checked my computer. 298 feet, 18 minutes of bottom time remaining. I had to work fast. I swam toward the structure, trying to ignore the reaching hands of the preserved victims. trying not to think about Tommy watching me with that horrible smile. The demolition charges were heavy in my pack, and my hands felt clumsy with narcosis as I worked to pull them out. "What are you doing, Mark?" Tommy's voice again, curious but not alarmed. "Are you trying to help us?" I placed the first charge at the base of the structure, activated its timer. 30 minutes until detonation. Plenty of time to get to the surface if I started ascending immediately. But there were 3 more charges to place for optimal destruction of the site. "Mark, I miss you. I miss fishing together. Don't you miss me?" Tommy's voice had changed, become plaintive, heartbreaking. "Please don't leave me here. It's so cold, so lonely." I placed the second charge on the opposite side of the structure, my hands shaking now. Not from cold. From the knowledge of what I was about to do, I was going to destroy this place, and everyone trapped in it would finally die. Really die. Not this suspended horror they'd been experiencing, including Tommy. "I'm sorry," I said through my regulator, knowing he couldn't hear me, needing to say it anyway. "I'm so sorry, Tommy." I placed the third charge, 15 minutes of bottom time left. 1 more to go. That's when the structure started to move. The pale roots or tentacles. I realized now they were part of something larger, something that had been dormant at the center of the structure. Began to writhe. The water suddenly felt different, charged with something like electricity or malice or consciousness. The entity was waking up. "You're trying to take them from me." Tommy's voice now, but deeper, wrong, speaking in harmony with itself. "My collection, my specimens, you can't have them." The bodies around the structure began to move, not like drowning victims now, but like marionettes controlled by a cruel puppeteer. They swam toward me, arms outstretched, faces twisted into expressions that mimicked hunger or anger or need. I fumbled for the last charge, trying to place it while keeping away from the approaching bodies, but there were so many of them, and they were coordinated, moving as one. Christina Vega grabbed my arm. Robert Hayward reached for my regulator. Others surrounded me, pulling, grasping. I kicked free, pulled myself around the structure, and jammed the final charge into a crevice. Activated the timer, all 4 charges set, countdown running. But now I was surrounded, and the entity, whatever it was at the center of this collection site, was fully awake and aware something emerged from the structure. Not a creature exactly, but a presence, a shape made of darkness and water, and the accumulated resentment of everything that had drowned here. It wasn't Tommy anymore, wasn't wearing his face. It was showing me its true form, or as close as my narcosis-addled brain could comprehend, and it was reaching for me. I checked my computer. 12 minutes of bottom time left. Not enough time to fight, barely enough time to escape if I started ascending immediately. The demolition charges would go off in 27 minutes. I needed to be clear of the blast radius, needed to be starting my decompression stops, but the bodies were still grabbing at me, and the entity was moving closer. In that moment of clarity that sometimes comes in extreme crisis, I realized what I had to do. I pulled the quick release on my weight belt, letting 30 pounds of lead drop to the lake bed. Immediately, I started to rise too fast, dangerously fast, but the only way to break free from the grasping hands. As I shot upward, I saw Tommy one more time. His face was his own again for just a moment, clear and aware, and he mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Then I was rising too fast to see anything, my ascent rate climbing dangerously as I fought to control my buoyancy. The dive computer was screaming at me. Alarms I could feel through the device even if I couldn't hear them. Too fast. Way too fast. I was going to get the bends, nitrogen-forming bubbles in my blood, maybe killing me before I even reached the surface, but I couldn't slow down. The entity was following me, a darkness rising from below, and if it caught me, I'd become part of the collection. Another preserved victim for its cathedral of drowning. I passed the bodies on my way up. They weren't following, were just hanging there watching me ascend, past 200 feet, past 150, the water lightening from black to blue. At 100 feet, I managed to slow my ascent. inflating my BCD to control my rise. The darkness below wasn't following anymore. Maybe it couldn't leave the deep water. Maybe it was returning to protect its collection before the charges went off. I forced myself to stop at 70 feet, then 50 feet, making rapid decompression stops, even though I knew they wouldn't be enough. I'd ascended too fast from too deep. The nitrogen dissolved in my tissues was already forming bubbles. I could feel it starting, a tightness in my joints, a burning sensation in my chest. At 20 feet, I checked my watch. 3 minutes until the charges detonated. I was too close. Needed to get further from the blast site, but I also needed to finish decompression. Every minute I cut short increased my risk of severe bends, of paralysis or death. 2 minutes, I made my choice. Started ascending the final 20 feet, breaking every decompression protocol James had taught me. But I'd rather risk the bends than get caught in an underwater explosion. I surfaced with 90 seconds to spare, ripped out my regulator, and screamed, "Go!" at Dr. Chen. She had the engine running before I even reached the boat, helped me struggle aboard with my gear still on, too heavy to shed quickly. We motored away from the eastern section, racing to put distance between us and the demolition site. At exactly 30 minutes after I'd activated the first charge, the lake erupted. The explosion was muffled by 300 feet of water, but still massive. A dome of disturbed water rose from the surface, white and churning. The boat rocked violently. And then, a few seconds later, came the secondary effects. Bodies rose to the surface. Not all at once, but over the course of the next minute. 9 bodies in various states of preservation, released from whatever force had kept them suspended in the deep. Tommy was among them, his red and black jacket bright against the dark water. Dr. Chen was already on the sat phone, calling emergency services, multiple bodies surfacing on Harrow Lake eastern section. We need recovery teams immediately. I sat in the bottom of the boat, struggling to breathe, my joints burning with the first serious symptoms of decompression sickness. But I'd done it. The collection was destroyed. The entity's cathedral was rubble on the lake bed, and Tommy could finally rest. I spent 3 days in a hyperbaric chamber in Duluth, being treated for severe decompression sickness. The doctors said I was lucky. The bends could have killed me or left me paralyzed. As it was, I just have some lasting joint pain and a story I could never tell anyone who'd actually believe it. Rachel drove up the day after the dive. After Dr. Chen called her and explained that I'd been in an accident, when I was finally well enough to talk, I told her everything. Expected her to be furious, to leave me for being so reckless. Instead, she cried and held my hand and said, "I wish you'd told me before. I wish I could have helped." "You did help. Knowing you were waiting for me gave me a reason to come back up." The bodies were recovered over the next week. Tommy's was the first they brought in. Cause of death was drowning, but there were marks on his legs that the coroner couldn't explain, like he'd been held down, restrained by something strong enough to prevent him from reaching the surface. The other bodies told similar stories. All showed signs of having been preserved in impossible conditions, maintained in states that medical examiners couldn't explain. The official reports called it unusual water chemistry and unique pressure conditions. No one wanted to admit what the evidence actually suggested. Dr. Chen published a paper on Harrow Lake 6 months later, carefully avoiding any mention of mimetic entities or drowning collections. She focused on the psychological impact of recurring drowning sites, on how trauma and loss could create community folklore. It was well received academically, even if it danced around the truth. I went back to work, back to my life, back to trying to be the husband Rachel deserved, but I still thought about Tommy every day, about that moment at 300 feet when his face had been his own again, when he'd thanked me for freeing him. And I thought about the structure at the bottom of the lake, whether I'd really destroyed it completely or just damaged it, whether the entity still existed down there, waiting to rebuild its collection. On the 1-year anniversary of Tommy's death, Rachel and I drove to Harrow Lake together. She'd never been there before, had only heard my stories. We stood at the eastern shore, looking out over the water. "It's beautiful," she said. "I can see why you and Tommy loved it here." "Yeah, it is beautiful." And it was. The morning sun turned the water gold. Birds sang in the trees, everything normal and peaceful and perfect. But I'd seen what was under that beauty. I'd seen the collection, the cathedral, the entity that wore the faces of the drowned. And I knew that beauty and horror weren't opposites. They were just different faces of the same deep water. "Do you regret it?" Rachel asked quietly. "Going down there? Almost dying?" I thought about it. About Tommy's final thanks. About the 9 bodies finally at rest. About the certainty that I'd stopped something from killing again. No, I don't regret it. I just regret that I had to do it alone. She took my hand. "You weren't alone. Not really. I was here even if I didn't know what you were doing. Dr. Chen was helping. And Tommy," her voice caught, "Tommy knew you came for him. That matters. We scattered Tommy's ashes on the lake that day, watched them drift across the surface, eventually sinking into the depths he'd loved. It felt right. He belonged here, but on his terms now, at peace." As we were leaving, an old man approached us from the parking area. Vernon, from the bait shop. I hadn't seen him since before the dive. "Wanted to thank you," he said, shaking my hand. "Don't know what you did exactly, but the lake feels different now, safer. My grandson wants to learn fishing here this summer. First time I felt comfortable teaching him on these waters. Your grandson will be safe," I said, and I believed it. The entity was gone, its collection scattered. Harrow Lake was just a lake again. We drove home as the sun set, Rachel dozing in the passenger seat, and I thought about deep water and the things it keeps, the bodies, the secrets, the darkness we can't see from the surface. But I also thought about the light that morning had brought to the lake, about how even the deepest darkness eventually gives way to dawn, about how sometimes you have to descend into the worst places to bring back the people you love. Tommy was gone, but I'd found him one last time, had heard him say thank you, had given him peace, and maybe I'd found some peace too. The lake remembers everything. They say every stone, every fish, every life that ends in its depths. But maybe now it also remembers Tommy as something more than just another drowning. Maybe it remembers him as the brother I loved enough to risk everything for. Maybe it remembers that love is deeper than any water, stronger than any entity, brighter than any darkness, and maybe that's enough.